And thank you for joining us here on PM Express. It's a conversation that started last week, but we need to pause for a second and look at it much closer because of its implications, not only for national security, but also for regional foreign affairs relations with our sub-regional neighbors. And it has to do with the crackdown on undocumented migrants. There's also the street begging angle. Have you driven in town recently? You see the nuisance that is created by many of these undocumented migrants who have flocked onto our streets and making it pretty difficult for commuters, but also for those in vehicles to maneuver. And they pose a threat not only to themselves, but to drivers generally. Yes, last week, the government decided to do something about it. So what we saw was that they went onto the streets and began a crackdown. A few people were arrested on the back of that. More than 2,000, indeed, to be more specific, were arrested. 2,400, 2,241 of the undocumented migrants were arrested. And they were, from what I understand, put in the bus and taken to the immigration office and kept in the detention center. We'll get some clarity on that for you in a second. But 59% of those who were rounded up were children. And that raises fundamental questions that how we watched on, first of all, for them to cross through our borders into Ghana, where were the checks at the borders, and why has it taken this long for the system to react to it? 2,241, with 59% of them being children. This is not the first time this has happened. We've seen in 2022, for example, the Immigration Service updating us or telling us about some 8,403 irregular migrants that they had intercepted at the time. What happened to them, we don't know. But the whole idea is that they will be repatriated back to their home countries. Many of them are coming from the sub-region, including those women we spoke to who told us a story about why she's here, talking about the husband and relatives have all been killed and that they have nowhere else to go. And so they found Ghana to be a safe haven. Now, it raises the question about, do they qualify for asylum, for example? Are they here seeking refuge? And if that is the case, don't we have obligations under international law to keep them? Is it in keeping with our obligations under international law to round them up and send them back to their home country if indeed this is the case, that their husband and relatives have all been killed? So there are fundamental questions there that we need to ask beyond just the fact that they are a nuisance on the street, that we see them every day. And there's a suspicion that many of them are Nigerians, right, who are flocked into the country using either illegal routes or coming through the borders. So we'll get some clarity on how they manage to come to the borders. There are many unapproved routes into Ghana. But the issue about the West African sub-region, the protocols that we operate with, and many have said that they are here legally. And they've cited the ECOWAS protocols, right, that if you're fleeing threat, for example, of war, as far as the refugee regulations are concerned, then of course you can come in here. And that's where they'll put, for example, this woman. So in the screening process, are our immigration officials mindful of this? Because somebody can take Ghana on to any of the international courts and make a case for these migrants. Then, of course, you must have no serious non-political crimes. You must not have committed those crimes, not a danger to national security to qualify to be a refugee. But also there's a question around seeking asylum that also comes with its own set of regulations under this. Under the ECOWAS treaty, they can also stay visa-free for 90 days. Have they determined already how many days they've been here? And then there's also the residence permit that will be required for extended stay that we know they also do not have. Now, the core objectives of the ongoing immigration operation, according to the Immigration Office itself, is that they want to repatriate them, but they want to do it humanely. So are they going to put them in the bus and transport them at whose cost? Are they going to put them on a flight, right? Are the countries of origin going to bear this, as we've seen, for example, in the US, where Trump has been on an anti-immigration war and rounding up undocumented migrants in the country and sending them away, right? There's also the disruption of criminal networks among these undocumented migrants who have made Ghana their home. And if you look at where many of them camp from in the cities, Sabon Zongo, Nima, Abosokai, and Obechebi runabout, these were the areas where the raid targeted. And that tells the story. A lot of them sleep on the streets, and they beg, and they make a lot of money doing so, right? We've seen street beggars, we've seen petty traders, we've seen Okada operators, and we've seen illegal mining also becoming areas that attract these illegal miners. The Immigration Office itself has been receiving some budgetary allocations over the time. It's grown, right? And we see in this government is the highest yet we've seen grown to 1.7 billion because the government obviously intends to do more of this. But the interesting thing was the government is funding a bit more. The budget allocation to the migration refugee management is going up. We have a president whose foreign policy objective when it comes to those three former ECOWAS members, and Niger is a key member of that group of Sahelian states who have broken away from ECOWAS. And many of these individuals who were rounded up, as we've been told over the years, are Nigerians. But we have a president who is approaching and executing a foreign policy objective of trying to bring them back into the fold, and so has actually appointed an emissary for that effect. How does it, for example, affect that relations that he's trying to build, running up their nationals in Ghana and trying to repatriate them? Won't that affect that entire objective? So we'll have to analyze that. But also there's a child rights angle to this, considering that more than 50% of those arrested are children. Well, what rights do they have? And can those rights be protected even while we conduct the raids that we have done? My guests will join me for a conversation after this. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. It's brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Academic Times, a Pepsodent Cavity Fighter toothpaste. And as you know, Ghana, we need to talk about tanks. So if you want to do that, then you know the secret to real water storage. It's simple. If your tank doesn't have the tortoise on it, then it's not the correct tank. That's the right tortoise tank. Syntex Tanks is a champion of water tanks. It is strong and durable and built to handle Hungarian weather. Rain or shine, Syntex Tank has your back. So my people, go and get outside and get one of those tanks because it is the most durable. Join the Syntex Tank family today and enjoy water storage that's tough like tortoise. Call them on 0244 335 168, or you can find their agents across the country. You can go onto the website at syntextank.com, a strong, a tab, and also Academic Times newspaper. Look out for that, and a Pepsodent Cavity Fighter also. My guest joining me for a conversation tonight, we have the Deputy Interior Minister, Ebenezer Oklite-Telabi, joins us for a conversation because we need to get an update on the more than 2,000 illegal immigrants who were rounded up last week. Albert Young is a National Network Coordinator at WANEP, and Dr. Ishmael Helvo is a lecturer and international relations analyst, also joining me. Brad Appiah is a child rights activist, also joining me for a conversation. We lost briefly before we started the Deputy Minister who will join us. Once he joins us, we'll get clarity and get an update on the situation with the immigrants who have been rounded up already, the undocumented migrants who have been rounded up already, so we can get clarity on what is happening with them and where they are, especially the children who were also part of those who had been picked up. But let me start with you, Albert. Albert, so what happened last week obviously was one that added some call for. and you put it within the West African context, it was long overdue, was it not? Hello, Abayayan, can you hear me? Please unmute for me. And I appreciate if all of you can unmute for me so we can have a flowing conversation.
Yes,
Albert, can
good
you hear me?
evening
Yes.
to you
This
and
is
your
long overdue,
listeners,
was it not?
my colleagues online. Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I'm unmuted.
Yes, I mean, I was asking you earlier what happened last week.
You cannot hear. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Can you?
Yes, I heard the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at the dynamics within the sub-region, and also based on several protocols and frameworks, it has made it possible for many of West African nationals to move from one country to the other to probably just to recuperate, and also to transact businesses and to meet relations. But unfortunately, it appears that within that framework, there are some abuses where people overstay and probably move into other countries without reason and all of that, which probably might be creating some nuisance and insecurity in some of the countries. And so if you move across the entire country, you would find, especially in the business communities, that there are people who are loitering about, and they appear not to have any reason to be there. We have people who are serving as guardians or parents, and then we have others who are on the streets and engaging in begging. Sometimes those who are the targets consider it harassment and a nuisance to them. So it is not surprising that that exercise has taken place in the couple of days that we are all talking about. But we also need to be mindful of how we go about it in order that we do not create some uncertainties in the other countries, bearing in mind that we also have Ghanaians in all of these other countries in the sub-region. But be that as it may, it is important that we are very critical about the issue of trafficking in persons and the related crimes that may be occurring around that. It is against the law of all the states that trafficking in persons, should not be allowed, and Ghana is no exception. And to the extent that we find juveniles involved in this, and also people who are deceived, in one way or the other to get into some other countries, and when they are in there, then their livelihood, their rights, and how they should be able to go about freely in those countries, and knowing that these were the reasons for which they were moved, or they moved into those countries or jurisdictions, are no longer the case. And they are kind of restricted or restrained in their movements and activities that they conduct. So we need to be very mindful of that. It is against the state's rights, and the laws, and against international protocols and laws. And no institution or group of persons or individuals should countenance that. And I think that that the exercise is important, especially that we are facing issues of violent extremism across the sub-region. There might be those, tools of, using them to influence the operations of violent extremism, recruitment, radicalization, and all of that. And it is important that we are stringent in that operation. But as I indicated, mindful that we need to follow the international relations protocols that exist.
Yeah.
Also mindful of the ECOWAS protocol of free movements of people, goods, and services. And knowing very well that we are also thinking about integration. At the moment, we have some of the countries breaking away, and there is stress, between countries and amongst countries.
You say that, but
Ghana
I'm also curious about the element of the sheer number of children involved in this. And Bright, considering that the overwhelming majority of those who were rounded up last week, 59% of them are children. We don't know where they are right now. I mean, but what we expect to happen is that they would have been kept at a detention center awaiting their extradition out of the country. They'll be deported, obviously. Does the fact that you have so many children, does it change the way you expect the state to handle this matter?
Well, it's not really about my expectation, but the expectation of the framework and the protocols that we have. That once children are involved, the dynamics changes, and the approach that you give to it must also be done in a manner that will protect the very interests of children. Because when you look at all the conventions and the charters that protect the right of children, one of the key things that I've alluded to is the fact that in all things, be it any institution at all, the best interest of the child must be protected. Therefore, where you do a rescue and children are involved, we expect that you would invoke that right that belongs to children. And to the extent that within the Children's Act, we have made it law that in all matters, the best interest of children must be protected. So if the act is taking place in Ghana, we expect that the Ghana Immigration Service will look at that to make sure that there's no any violation. But when you look at what happened, Evan, is a fact that is long overdue, and we should not even downplay the effect that it would have on us as a country, and the effect that it will have on children as human beings. So clearly, there's a need for us to take this kind of action to get rid of all these people so that we can also safeguard the welfare of children. But once you as a country, you have allowed the system to accommodate such an activity, then it's also on you to find ways and means to deal with it, especially where children are involved. But when the rescue were done, we realized that the way and manner children were picked from the street will clearly give them some kind of definition. So, for instance, you would describe the adults as illegal immigrant, but in the context of this country, you cannot describe the children as illegal immigrant. You cannot also describe them as juveniles because they've not committed any offense against the law. In fact, it is the state that has even committed offense against them by allowing them to be on the street. So the approach is a bit different. And again, when you look at the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, even if you consider them to be foreigners, the convention under Article 11 prescribes the certain processes that you have to go through to be able to deal with the matter properly. Otherwise, these children can even bring action against the state for either violating their right or allowing them to participate in an environment where they are not supposed to. So all these things are there. And then you also look at the Beggars and Destitute Act, which also give a certain description as to how, when people engage children on the street, what the punishment should be. Then again, you look at the issues of social protection, in this case, child protection. And within our protection protocol, we have outlined how we will go about rehabilitation, maintenance, and reintegration. So once they leave, they are in Ghana, and we are carrying out these exercises in Ghana, we expect that the state would also invoke that. So we didn't see that. We only saw Ghana Immigration Service taking action on the children and more or less packing them into a vehicle to a destination that we don't know whether it is child-friendly, whether it is respecting all the protocols, and whether or not even Ghana Immigration Service do have the capacity to deal with that, because our checks shows that the gender ministry wasn't directly involved in the whole exercise. The Ghana police, in this case, you're also looking at the DOFSU, we did not see their participation in it at all. So clearly, it raised a whole lot of questions, and questions that we'll be asking tomorrow in respect to how these things were done and how they are recognizing the dignity of these children and how they can protect them. So basically, for us, we think that what we saw and the actions and the way and manner it was carried out, we feel that there's some kind of abuse. And where they are now, no, you cannot. You can't keep them under detention because they are not criminals. Children are not they are not juveniles.
Yeah, but
You have to
you
give them
cannot you cannot also separate them from their parents. There's the parents who, from the allegation, and we know if indeed they are foreigners, and they're still screening them, right? They may have violated our immigration laws, even if they're covered under ECOWAS. They would have stayed there, in many cases, more than 90 days, as they're allowed to do without, free, visa-free, etc. If you've picked up the parents, you must necessarily have the child with them, right? And so that goes without saying, that if you are rounding them up, the children must go with their mothers, as we see on your screens there. It is just a consequence of the mother's illegality, right?
Yeah, that is why you will need experts to be able to be part of the whole exercise, so that whilst you are dealing with the adult, they will find ways and means to also deal with the issues that concerns the children. You don't extend the act of the parent to the children. And you see, when it comes to our laws, we have given a vivid description to a child. And when you look at Ghana's law on children, is just a representation of the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. And I'm saying this because we didn't raise any reservations about the convention. For that matter, we have wholly accepted the letters and the spirit, and that is what we are working with. And if you even look at how we drafted the Children's Act, you could see clearly that there's a flow from the Convention on the Right of the Child. So there are existing protocols that must also accompany how we do that. That is why I'm laying the emphasis that, yes, people have stayed in this country illegally, but you cannot extend that to their children. Even if you want them to be in environment where their parents are, that is why you need experts to be able to handle the children while you take all the records that you need to take. And even if you want to repatriate them, the law requires certain processes, especially where children are involved. The law requires certain processes for you to do that. And one of the key things that the law requires that we should do is that once children are involved, then you need to have a bilateral or multilateral arrangement with the country in which they are coming from, so that as a country where you are sending them back to, you should also be interested in the destination of these children, because at the end of the day, you have to transfer the responsibility to the countries that they are coming from. And if you don't know the destination, then more or less you are also neglecting the basic responsibility that you owe the children when they are within your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, and this, the sheer number of children obviously complicates it. We're still hoping that we can re-establish contact with the Deputy Interior Minister.
That is why I'm concerned about why Ghana Immigration Service is the only organization leading this charge. That is my issue.
But it's obvious, they were treating this as an immigration problem.
No, but you see, these people entered this country illegally. And
that's an assumption. It's very possible they came here legally. It's very, very possible.
There's a lot of research that has confirmed that. And we know the route. And I can tell you on authority that Ghana Immigration Service knows the route that these people use to come to this country. And even if you look at the research that we did, clearly some of the children are in schools in their respective countries. So they sometimes come to this country to do this activity when they are on vacation. So if you study clearly, you realize that a certain period, a number of them will be on the street. And then when you compare it to another season, you realize that they are minimal in terms of the numbers. So this is a deliberate act that people are using children to commit. So instead of looking at the root causes, we are just looking at the surface and giving certain treatment to children that they don't deserve. Because it is not, no child in Niger would decide that he or she wants to come to Ghana to come and do this act. They are in the company of a parent, and in some cases, not even their parent. They are in the company of other people who think that they can use them to do that. And I can also tell you that some of these children, after the day's work, they go to somebody to render account. So the issue is not only about whether they have breached migration laws, but it's also a social protection matter that you require a comprehensive system to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, just a second there on that point, and I'll bring in Holovo into this. I mean, Bright raises fundamental questions, but also our responsibility as a state under international law But looking at it, and the precedent in the US, isn't it the responsibility of their countries of origin, first to ensure that the kids were not uprooted from their school environment by parents or others and brought into this country, and that if we are going to do something about it, we simply round them off like we're seeing and send the mothers with their children back into their home country? It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not as simple as that because, as you have said, although it is the responsibility of their home government to ensure that the children are not uprooted from school and brought to this country, that they have failed. Now, they are already in your jurisdiction, and you have the primary responsibility to ensure that, so far as children are concerned, the primary principle in international law is that you act in the best interest of the child. Now, so if you are going to act in the best interest of the child, then I tend to support the earlier speaker who said that then you have to involve social protection officers in the exercise so that the best interest of the child is determined. Now, given that some of them may not be even accompanied, because then we know that the root cause of this involves a little bit of criminality, where criminal networks are taking advantage to smuggle them in here to kind of beg for them. People, adults are bringing them in, trafficking them here and there. So you have to always be minded that some of them, they have genuine reasons why they're in Ghana. Some of them may be facing threats of hunger, threat of starvation back home. And given the conflict situation in the Sahel states, you may know that some of them, perhaps, their home is under siege. So now you cannot return them under international law back to where they may face danger. Then you are not acting in the best interest of the child. So far as those children are concerned, you have to thoroughly screen them. Those who have their parents here with them, who are actually committing the offense of breaching immigration law, then you have to arrange with their home government, who would then receive them and help in the reintegration process into their own society. So it's not a matter of just returning them. Even this process you are going through, you have to engage the other countries. When you identify the countries they are coming from, you have to inform the authorities there to prepare, and they have to collaborate with you, make a plan of their reintegration into society. That is, those whose parents may not be found. Where will you go and dump them? You can't just dump them. They are children. So you have obligation under international law, the Convention on the Right of the Child, the African Charter on the rights and the welfare of the child, all these, and then the Ghanaian own law. So you have obligation for them. We may deport those with their parents who we feel that have breached immigration law, and when they return to their home country, they may not be facing any imminent danger. But those who face imminent danger, that's a country with the various obligations we have under international law. We have to maintain them here and put them under some level of social protection.
I mean, but why though? I mean, I want to bring in Albert into the conversation. Putting them under, first of all, we're running them up because we believe they're here illegally. And we are talking about keeping them here under social protection. You agree with that, considering the potential security threats that you've already talked about? Isn't the best outcome, and one that really advances the Ghanaian interest, sending them back, but most importantly, ensuring that once we do so, we safeguard our borders, prevent them from coming back in? Albert, please unmute for me.
Yes, so we usually say that two wrongs do not make a right. As Bright and the other colleague, Honorable indicated, once the children are found to be engaging in certain acts, not because they are doing so on their own volition, but that some other processes influence them to locate them where they are, for example, in Ghana, as the case is, and engaging in certain acts, it behoves on the government of Ghana and the people of Ghana to do the right thing, bearing in mind that there are international protocols, conventions, and that we also have our own ECOWAS regional protocols, frameworks that we need to do things mindful of, and that as Ghana, we also have our own laws. And it is important that even as we are mindful of our own security, we should do things walking the thin line of making sure that we are providing security, we are ensuring security, and that we are also respecting or complying with these protocols and frameworks and laws that we have. So it is not just a matter of thinking that, yes, there have been offenses committed. And once those offenses are committed and the people are found to be engaging in them, for example, begging in Ghana is not something that is allowed, and especially as it might be an act that is being engaged in by people who, as we know, have not gone through the right, immigration procedures and are within our jurisdiction and are engaging in such acts. It is important that we are mindful of respecting our own neighbors, and as I indicated at the beginning, that we also might have Ghanaians, who are in these other jurisdictions. So to go through the normal process, the due diligence is very important. How do we do the contacting? How do we engage our counterparts in the other countries? And I was happy to see that the Nigerian government, and the agencies complied and cooperated very well, to make sure that the right thing is done. And they are trying to get them back into their own jurisdiction to integrate them. So as Bright Tinko indicated, it is very important that we look at the background. What is the context within which these kinds of things are happening? That people are able to traffic others. They are not their parents. Sometimes they are, and they are also guardians. That there are people who are just involved in a certain kind of business that get these children out, to engage in some of these things. And we also have the adults who innocently, for the search of greener pastures, find themselves in these situations. So it is important that, despite the fact that we are mindful of our own security and making sure that we want to ensure that there is law and order and that people are not engaged in criminal acts, we are also expected by international protocols and local conventions and laws to make sure that the right things are done.
Yeah, there was a post by the Interior Minister. We had his deputy on. We've lost him. We should want to establish contact. Where he talks about the objective for the raid last week being the dismantling of the criminal networks behind this organized begging that we are seeing on our streets. He calls it the organized street begging, and that they're going to be extending this beyond Accra to the other regions. And it gives us the numerical breakdown of the individuals that they rounded up. They detained 909 adults, 1,332 children. So that's a significant number. So far more children than we have the adults in there. But the target was, they are targeted the adults. The adults were the primary reason why this has happened, because the minister believes that they are part of a criminal network, and this was an intelligence-led operation. And I know we focus quite substantively about, so yes, you've arrested the adults, many of them women, but what do you do with the children? And Bright had maintained that we should have social welfare involved. Bright, is it your contention that we should not repatriate the children if we are repatriating the adults, that Ghana should be responsible for keeping them here and getting social welfare to take care of them? Because we have to repatriate the mothers and the adults involved, 909 of them.
Of course, I don't belong to the school of thought that we should allow the parent to go without also the children accompanying them. That is why it is necessary for us to obey all the protocols in order to do that in a safe and supportive environment, where each child will recognize that this is my parent, and for that matter, accompanying her or him will not raise any eyebrows in terms of how the other country will receive them. So, and all these things cannot be done by Ghana Police Service. They cannot also be done by Ghana Immigration Service. It is only social welfare that have the technical eye to be able to even know whether the association of a child to a certain adult can even be classified as a relation. So these are things that you need to identify some of these things. And again, as I've said, the Article 11 of the Convention on the Right of the Child, it's clear that once you want to repatriate a child, one of the key things that the state must do is to ensure that there is some kind of a bilateral arrangement between these two countries. So even if the state decides that no, the capacity of the country in which they are coming from cannot be able to provide welfare system for the children, the state can decide to host them here and grant them either refugee status or give them asylum, where you will integrate them and give them all the social benefit that any Ghanaian child
but
would enjoy.
wouldn't that be counterproductive, because it may encourage others in the sub-region to just flock in here because they arrest you and then your children are giving protection?
You see where when the war happened in Ukraine and Russia, you see how most of these European countries were preventing other people entering that country because they know the protocol. So they will not even allow you to even come in at all, because when they come in, you'd have to obey all the international protocols. You cannot just say that a child has entered your country, so you are sending the child back. And that is what for us in Ghana we should have done. But once we have allowed them to come in, then they are entitled to enjoy all the social benefit as any Ghanaian child would enjoy, because we have given a certain description to who a child is. And as I've said, we've just downloaded the Convention on the Right of the Child into our domestic legislations. So we need to respect that. So even if you don't do the bilateral arrangement, you cannot allow a child to leave the jurisdiction of this country. So there's a lot of things that we have to put in place. And as the minister said, it's an organized crime. And I don't think there's an organized crime against the state. I think that it's an organized crime against children. So even if you want to look at it from that perspective, then the children should be the focus for you to determine. Because if you look at the numbers that are coming out, children are more than 59 or 60% of the numbers that were rescued. So a lot of calculation must go into it for you to determine the kind of social protection safety net that you need to create to be able to take care of these children. Since Friday up to date, there have never been any communication whatsoever as to how the state is providing care for the children, for the international community, and within our local setting to understand the approach that we are giving to it. And that is even an error. So the focus should not just be on the fact that adults are committing crime, but the state should also put their lens on the welfare of children to know how to approach it, so that you don't look at it purely from the criminal point of view to kick in some kind of arrest, how we do it, how we do rescuing and all that. But once you know that there are children involved, there's a way and manner that you have to approach this particular case.
And Dr. Ishmael, I'll come to you pretty shortly, but Albert, if you watch the videos that we've been rolling on our screens and the mothers and the children, to think that they are crossing the Sahel all the way into Ghana and walking sometime from up north to Accra, that network that allows that to happen must be pretty extensive. Because, first of all, they can't afford a flight. They don't look like they can. I don't see how they can themselves walk that distance. So there are obviously some facilitation that must have happened, because there's a sheer number of children we see there, more than 1,300 of them, to move them, one mother with 2 or 3 children, move from the Sahel all the way down south into Ghana, into Accra. That tells you the commitment that these parents have. But if indeed it's part of a criminal network, this must be very established network in the sub-region. How does the state go about dismantling this? Does it end with this raid at Circle, for example? Or do we need a more international effort to deal with this at the source?
Yes, so I think we need to adopt a two-pronged approach. One is that how do we make the environment unconducive for those who might intend to come into our jurisdictions? And I've always said that, if you look at many of the states across the globe, they want to attract people who would have meaning in their jurisdictions. But there are also some people who find themselves through forced migration. And it is important that once those people find themselves in your jurisdiction, you need to go by the conventions. I participated in several risk and vulnerability assessments, including for West Africa. And the data indicates that, somebody is in Nigeria, maybe the eastern or northern part of Nigeria, has a communication with another person in Niger. That person has communication with somebody in Burkina Faso and also in Ghana. Before the person moves from Nigeria or they want to traffic somebody from Nigeria, there is already that communication about the route of the person they are trafficking to come into Ghana. And so it is a well-established network, to the extent that once the person gets into Ghana, for example, there is already some kind of makeshift accommodation. There are people who, one person gets the accommodation and about 20 or 30 or so individuals are being housed in that one single room. So it tells you that there is a kind of a network that is existing. And it is important that once we start with that local initiative of repatriation, and again, I want to say that how much of the profiling have we done about on the people that we have arrested, to determine their linkages, with other groups and individuals, and also to determine the relationships that they have, with parents, with guardians, and some other locals. It's important to establish that, but not just bundling people up and then repatriating them once we have cooperation from their home countries. It is very important as well to look at the international cooperation. How do we relate with other countries to make sure that we identify the reservoirs of these kinds of trafficking
why you say
and
that?
be able to nick them?
Why you say that? There's an international relations angle to this that places Ghana in a dilemma, does it not, Dr. Ishmael Howell? Because from everything else we've been told before, beyond this very example, a majority of these illegal immigrants may be coming from Niger because of the conflict there, etc. We know that Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are already out of ECOWAS. But we have a president who is prosecuting an international relations policy of bringing these three countries back into the fold, back into the ECOWAS fold. He has actually appointed an envoy for the Sahel just for that purpose, and is very aggressively trying to lead the sub-regional effort to try and reintegrate them back into ECOWAS. Considering that we are now running up what possibly could be their citizens in the country with children and all, and with the desire to repatriate all of them, do you see that as a possible point of tension between the Nigerians and our government at a time when we are very aggressively trying to woo them back into ECOWAS?
I think that is the way you go about it that will determine the consequences thereof. First of all, I'm not sure that any country worth its salt is happy with the citizens being on the streets of another country and begging. So, in as much as we want Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger back into ECOWAS, you have to cooperate with them in a way that ensure that they can find a resettlement scheme for their citizens. If it also demands that you support them somehow to be able to reintegrate them into their society, then you have to go that way. Now, if we say that because we want them so much back into ECOWAS, therefore the people should be on the street, remember that these children being on the street itself is a crime. These women being on the street itself is exposing them to various dangers. On the street, these children are denied basic rights. In fact, they are exposed to physical danger. They could be knocked down by a car. Anything could have happened to them. In fact, the kind of air they are breathing on the street is itself a threat to their life. So in as much as we want them back, we also have to do this together with them. Without them, we cannot solve this problem. The fact is that you can deport all of them tomorrow, and the next day they will be back. If we don't take steps to dismantle the network that keep bringing them here, that will only happen if we collaborate with all the source countries and deal with the root causes of this issue.
But you see, you make that point, but at the time when the Immigration Service addressed a news conference shortly after the raid, never once did I hear the Immigration Office say that they had done this in collaborating with the Nigerian counterparts. Also considering that we actually have an envoy to Niger and the other Sahelian countries who have withdrawn from ECOWAS, you would think that this would have been a joint effort, right? We haven't had that yet. That clearly raises questions, doesn't it?
Of course, you have to first profile the people and be sure where they are coming from. So let me, I'm not holding brief for the Immigration Service, but then it is now that we should be finding out where are these people coming from. If by nationality is clearly established, then you can now engage those countries. For just saying that most of them are from Niger, that is quite not from the official sources. So we now need to probe the Immigration Service and find out where are they coming from and if contacts have been made. I would be surprised that the Immigration Service has not contacted the embassies and those countries and they are ready to deport. Where are you sending them to? If you don't contact them and make arrangements, you can't just put them on a vehicle, on a flight, and then go and dump them where? You ultimately need to get into touch with those countries because you have to make them aware of the situation, the dangers their citizens are exposed to, and what they should do to help you to reintegrate them there. So in as much as you have not heard from that side, if the immigrations have not taken those steps, then they need to take it. Because if you don't take it like that, you are just dealing with the symptoms of the issue. You need a very well-elaborated collaboration from all the countries that we may identify their citizens, women, children. Yes, some of them may be here for reasons that we cannot deport them back to go and face. If it is established, then perhaps we have to take them through either the refugee, that grant them refugee status to stay here. Mind you also, in as much as you are dealing with the children, you can, under the Convention on the Right of the Child, you can't separate the child from the parents. So you can't deport the parent and leave the child here. If you are going to grant refugee status to the child, we must do so with the parents. Because Article 9 and 10 are explicit on that you can't separate the child from the parent. That is not done. So as I said, we have to find a way, I believe so, that it will be strange that the Immigration Service and the authorities have not yet reached out. If they have identified the nationality of these people, they have not yet reached out to those nationalities and they are continuing with the process.
You know, I raised that point earlier about not hearing anything about the collaboration because of the Interior Minister making the point that this was an intelligence-led operation. If it's an intelligence-led operation, then before you go in, you should have a fair sense of who you are going to get and where they're coming from, right? Of course, subsequent screening will be more precise, but that would give you a sense. And before you do that, if your intelligence is good, you would have to alert their home countries about of course, if you arrest them, you need to keep them somewhere before you deport them, right? And,
yes, of course.
And that for me is, if it's an intelligence-led operation, then they should have had that basic intelligence about which countries are these likely coming from, these immigrants coming from.
Yeah, so of course, if as you say, it's an intelligence-led operation, if they have that intelligence of where they are coming from and they have not yet made contact, that would be a very grave error, because then you are not going to have a lot of cooperation with these people. If you don't collaborate with them, there's no way you are going to solve this issue. Because you can't put people on flight and just go, even flight or vehicle, and just go and land them
dump them in another country. I mean, they will not even receive them. I mean, we've seen even in the case of Trump, some countries actually reject the flights coming in.
Of course, they have the right for admission.
Just a brief question to Bright, because in the interest of time, Bright, just a minute there. You've raised questions about the treatment of the children, and you're asking transparency, but also they should be taken care of, fully complying with the rules and the laws on this matter. They will require representation of a sort. Is your agency proactively trying to do something to get answers on this matter?
Yeah, certainly. Since Friday, we've been asking a few questions and also done some kind of underground work in relation to the status of the children. So hopefully tomorrow we're having a press conference to underline some of the issues, and then after that, looking at how things will go, if there's a need for us to represent them in a certain appropriate forum, we will do that, because all that we want to do is that we want to ensure that the right steps are taken if we want to send them back to their respective countries, we do so, because as a doctor and my senior brother from WANEP mentioned, you cannot just come to the conclusion that these children are coming from Niger, because from our sources, some are coming from Nigeria, even Burkina Faso, Togo, and Ivory Coast, and even Nigeria. So clearly, there's a lot of work that we need to do to be able to know the status of these children and whether or not the countries that they are coming from is conducive for them to live. If
In
not,
other words, as we've seen elsewhere, there's a likelihood that you may represent them. You say appropriate forum. It's possible that you may take an immigration lawyer who may represent them in court to try and ensure that their repatriation is done humanely.
Definitely.
Bright, thank you very much. Dr. Holoba, I'm grateful also for joining me, and WANEP's Albert E.L. Yang. We were not able to reconnect to the Deputy Minister, but this is one conversation that needs a lot of clarity. What has happened to the more than 1,300 children and the 900 adults who were picked up last week? Where are they being kept? Under what conditions? When are they going to be repatriated? Which countries are they coming from? Have we been in touch with their home countries? So there's a lot of whole host of questions that still begs for answers, and we'll try and work that for you here on the Joy News. If you join us tomorrow, enjoy the rest of your evening.